We talked Peter through the songs as we recorded them. I had a microphone into which I had to say things like, okay, here comes the dat, or now the rat-a-tat-tat. It was the only thing that worked.
Alright, I want to talk about something that's been bugging me, not as a critic, but as a lifelong Kiss fan, and as a lifelong Paul Stanley fan. But what's bugging me is actually something about Paul Stanley, and more specifically, what Paul Stanley has said over the years about Peter Criss, and even more specifically than that is the criticisms Paul Stanley has leveled at Peter Criss's drumming over the years. So let me say this right up front. Paul Stanley is a legend. His stage presence, his energy, and his creative drive are a huge part of why Kiss broke through. But here's the thing. Over the years, Paul has made some very strong statements about Peter Criss, statements that I think deserve a closer look. He has said things like Peter couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, that he needed somebody to feed him the spaces for drum fills and drum beats in the studio through an earpiece, and that he didn't know how to even count basic time, he didn't know how to play his drum parts, and basically that he always needed his hand to be held, whether in a live setting or in the studio. In fact, let's listen to some of the comments that Paul Stanley had to make about Peter Criss right here.
We talked Peter through the songs as we recorded them. I had a microphone into which I had to say things like, okay, here comes the dat, or now the rat-a-tat-tat. It was the only thing that worked. As for any other drummers, the ones he couldn't play like, he disliked them all. Peter also didn't understand the basics of song structure. Verse, chorus, bridge, it all meant nothing to him. If I said, let's pick up at the second verse, he just sat there. He had to memorize a song from beginning to end, and if we stopped in the middle or he lost his place, he was fucked. Perhaps as a result, his playing was wild. You could call it unorthodox, but that wouldn't be accurate. It was just plain erratic. Peter instinctively played ahead. At times we had to catch up to him. In the best case scenario, a drummer is like the back of a chair. You can lean back on it and know it's there for you. It's a foundation. But Peter ran alongside us, which was a different animal.
Now, let's look at what history actually shows. Back in the 1970s, Peter Criss was a beast behind the drum kit. Watch performances right here on YouTube from the 70s of Black Diamond. Not the remixed, cleaned up stuff on the albums, but the raw, undoctored concert footage from people taping in the audience. And what you'll see is a drummer playing with fire, confidence, and precision, all while singing lead vocals on a track that's vocally demanding and rhythmically intense. And here we're just talking about one song, Black Diamond. There are many, many others where Peter is drumming his butt off. And in those same clips, many of the live clips, Paul, who isn't drumming or singing lead, hits plenty of bad chords. His guitar is often out of tune, and he sometimes sounds extremely winded. And this isn't a diss. This is exactly what the old concert footage shows. Now, here's another surprising curveball I want to throw into this conversation. If Peter Criss is such a terrible drummer, why can we trace influences to someone as great as Neil Peart? In the mid-1970s, Rush opened for Kiss, and if you go back and compare Peter's early drum solos with the early drum solo work of Neil Peart, you'll hear some real similarities. And I'm not saying Peter was ever technically at Neil's level, but I am saying that Peter was innovating, building long-form drum solos with dynamic shifts and rapid fills, crowd-pleasing rhythms, and tribal beats long before most rock audiences had even heard of Neil Peart, and yet Peter rarely gets credit for that. Now, I get it. Kiss has had a very complicated history. There's many conflicts, addictions, egos, breakups, reunions, and everything in between. But when I hear Paul Stanley repeatedly framing Peter Criss as a guy who couldn't play or sing, I can't help but wonder, why not just acknowledge that Peter gave Kiss its pulse in the early days? Why not say, yeah, we had our problems, but man, when Peter was locked in, he was magic. Instead, we often hear Paul rewriting the story like Peter was dead weight from day one, and I think that sells short a key part of what made early Kiss so powerful. Every band has stories, every band has fallouts, but I've listened to a lot of classic rock, and I don't know of any other musician of Paul Stanley's stature who talks down his former bandmates this consistently. It doesn't make me hate Paul, but it does make me a bit sad, because Kiss was bigger than any one member, and I think fans deserve the full picture, not just the polished memoir version. And for the record, Paul is not a bad guitarist. He's a solid rhythm player with a killer stage presence. But let's not pretend Peter was the weak link in the early days. He was a foundational force. So now I'm turning it over to you. Do you think that Peter's contributions have been unfairly minimized? Or do you agree with Paul's assessment of how things went down? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've got a favorite Peter Criss live moment, especially one where he's playing and singing, let me hear about it. Let's celebrate the whole story of Kiss. For my own part, I have been a Peter Criss fan for a very, very long time, and I have to get this off my chest, my problem with Paul Stanley's criticisms, but this doesn't in any way diminish the way I think of Paul Stanley as a songwriter, performer, frontman. This is what I think, but what really matters is what you think. So if you have an idea about this or any other topic connected to classic or contemporary music, please drop it in the section below, and remember to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot.
Music Guru here, asking you to help us on our march to 10,000 subscribers.